podcast where we read books and other words too. I'm Lilly.
And I'm Sara, and tonight we are so pleased to welcome Krystle Matar back onto the podcast to talk about Cassiel's Servant by Jacqueline Carey.
I'm very happy to be here. This is one of my favorite places for podcasting.
Home away from home.
Yeah, exactly.
I do like that you waved, listeners.
Yeah.
Krystle waved.
Forgot.
Very sweet. So I'll just narrate everything for our listeners. Yeah.
Well, you're used to doing a podcast with video, right?
Yeah.
So it makes sense. You've got that ingrained in you.
Yeah. I do. Or YouTube lives with the various live streamers. Those ones are very stressful because if I really fuck up, there's no editing.
Well, I think we all have a lot of opinions about this book. But before we get into it, what's something great that happened recently?
I'm on this podcast again with two of my favorite people in the world. So that's my great thing.
That is a good thing.
Yeah, it's nice. We used to do this a lot more often, and then we took a break, and now I'm back to doing it often again, and I'm happy with that.
Yeah. I went camping last weekend, which was lovely. We don't do backpacking like Sara does. We do car camping. My kind of camping.
I respect it.
You're not hardcore enough.
No, I'm not.
I feel like I'd like to be a backpacker in theory, because it's not so much the exercise that would turn me off, but I'm so bad with heat, and I feel like I would not survive in California backpacking. I would die.
I mean, it's not that bad.
It's not that bad.
Because you're up at altitude, so it's cooler.
Oh.
And depending on when you go, there can be thunderstorms in the middle of the day, and that cools things off too.
I would do it then.
Yeah.
Okay, I'll go backpacking with you during rainy season.
Okay.
And I'll go car camping with Lilly for the rest of the year.
It's pretty delightful, mostly like board games and reading. And Daniel brings an easel and does a new painting every year. All of these are not things that are backpacking friendly.
I think car camping also probably has better food.
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
Yes, we do some excellent campfire cooking.
I would disagree, though. Reading is very backpacking friendly.
But your phone can die and the books are heavy, so what do you do?
I bring a portable charger, and for longer trips, I have one of those like solar-powered chargers.
We had one of those. It didn't work very well.
Yeah, if you do it enough, you invest in a decent one, probably.
Well, Sara, you already used backpacking for a recent one, though, so you have to come up with something new.
I did, I know. And I have more backpacking in my future, but that'll be a future good thing. I think my good thing this week is that, so both of the pugs have had an intestinal bug for like the last 3 weeks. It's been kind of miserable. It's not been a pretty sight.
Oh, no.
Every time I think they're over it, it comes back. It has come back for Mr. Squeak again, but I think Snorri, knock on wood, might be over it. So that's my good thing.
That is a good thing. Getting them over that is a huge...
I'm really hoping he's over it. I mean, it's been a lot.
That's rough.
Yep.
Well, what is everyone drinking this evening?
I've got a beer tonight. It's called Bone Shaker from a brewery down in Toronto. And I swear the reason I drink this beer is because I love the label so much. It's just like a skeleton on a really old-fashioned bicycle. Which is kind of a stupid reason to drink beer, but also it's really strong, so it feels like I'm getting my money worth.
That's a fine reason to drink a beer.
There we go. So yeah, that's what I'm drinking. I'll probably get the whiskey once I'm done with the Bone Shaker.
I was going to say I'm drinking whiskey, both because my whiskey sibling is on, but also because they mention peated whiskey in the book, so it's on theme.
Yeah. One of these days we'll have to build like a whiskey TBR of like books that have the correct opinions about alcohol.
Yes. Legacy of the Brightwash right up there at the top.
I wanted to go on theme, but didn't have time to go to the store. So instead I'm drinking the dregs of a Boda box of rosé.
Nice, I respect it.
But it has ice in it, and that's kind of what I need.
That is nice. You said it was pretty hot today, so I definitely respect that.
Well, has anyone read anything good lately?
I've read a ton lately, actually. I finished reading Mad Sisters of Essie by Tashin Mehta, which I think I talked about in our last episode, and I absolutely adored. everything fantasy should be. I'm so pleased that Daw just acquired it and is bringing it over to the US. It was originally published by HarperCollins India. Fantastic book. Everyone should read it. I also read Corey Faw Does Social Mobility by Isabel Widener, I believe, which I liked. Was really weird. I'm not entirely sure I was smart enough to get it. It did have basically demon spider Bambi in it.
Okay.
As in Bambi with 2 spider legs coming out of each hoof. Very odd. But it was a quick read. So, yeah. I read that too.
Well, that's really weird mental image, Sarah, and I'm stuck on that now. Thanks.
You're welcome. I mean, really blame the author for that. I didn't come up with it.
I guess so, that's true. It's not your fault. You can't be blamed. I've been in one of those reading limbos where I just keep starting books and not finishing them. And not because there's anything wrong with them. I just I don't know, I'm just not connecting at the moment.
You're just not in the right mood for them?
Yeah, I kind of acknowledge that it's this is great, but I'm not there with you. I'm not following you where you're going. But this is going to sound so egotistical, but I'm not even sorry. I printed out the first chunk of book 3 because I've gone back to working on it now, and I just finished reading through what I have so far. And I'm connecting to that. I'm really happy with it. It's in better shape than I thought it was when I quit working on it. I was like, this is shit, I'm never going to write again, and I'm a failure. But then I read it now, and it's oh, I can fix this. Actually, I know exactly what I need to do, so that felt pretty good.
Oh, that's wonderful.
Yeah, I'll take it.
I have done absolutely zero recreational reading. I did not even technically finish this book.
To be fair, we do read a book a week, so that's a lot of reading.
It's kind of hard to fit recreational reading in amongst a schedule like that. What's the last one you read for the podcast that you really liked?
We just did Learn to Howl, which was supposed to come out today, that I was camping instead of editing it, by Jennifer Donahue. And that book, Sarah had read it before me, and was like, oh, this is good. And I was like, okay, I believe you. And then I read it, and I was like, oh, wait, yeah, this is actually really good.
Yeah, I love that feeling of going in expecting it to be good, and then it's even better. That's good stuff.
Mm-hmm. Now, Cassiel's Servant. I've been asked many times what I'm reading recently, and I have to go on this 5-minute explanation of, okay, so there's a series that started in 2000 or something like that, and it was a series of 6 books. And then this book is not part of that series, but it is a rewrite of the first book.
Was it really 6 books?
I don't know. I think there's 2 trilogies or something.
It's 9 books, actually. There's 3 trilogies. But they are related but independent trilogies, so they follow different characters. It helps to have read the previous books first, but I would say it's not, strictly speaking, necessary.
There you go. The more you know. I didn't realize there'd been so many. But Sandra specifically has 3.
Yes.
Okay.
She specifically has 3. The second trilogy follows her adopted son, and I forget who the third trilogy follows. I think it's the daughter of the queen.
Oh, interesting.
Maybe. Royal. I'm pretty sure she's related to that, royal line.
So, Kushiel's Dart. We had some opinions about it. I think I've probably softened to it over the, has it been a year, 2 years?
At least 2 years. Possibly 3.
I'm still not going to read more of them.
I was going to say, I think you're only softened to it because I'm not making you read it anymore.
Maybe.
I actually want to say the same thing. I feel like I'm less offended. I was so in my feelings about it when I read it, and I felt really bad after. But I do have to acknowledge that what she did was very good for that market. She definitely wrote an excellent, dense political fantasy. And that is a very specific market and a very specific skill. And all of my grumpy feelings were just me.
I think for me, part of it wasn't a book for me. Like you said,
Yeah.
political fantasy, not my thing. Also, I think we've read more books from the early 2000s that I've now been able to compare to it.
Oh, okay. So you're like, okay, she was doing the same sort of thing.
Oh no, I was gonna say that there were sure some edgelords who thought they were doing something.
Okay.
Carey actually fucking did something. Doesn't mean I liked it, but she did it.
I'm definitely in the same position as like she went for something original and probably blew the boots off of a lot of her contemporaries, and I do admire her for that because I feel like now that I'm a lot further down my own road, I feel like she definitely laid some flagstones of a path that I'm currently walking on. So for that, hats off to her for what she did.
It was interesting. I think on Cassiel's Servant, there was a blurb from Olivia Blake saying that like Kushiel's Dart was one of the forerunners of romantasy or something like that.
Yeah.
Along those lines.
That's an interesting take because actually it doesn't focus very much on her romantic life.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's very little romance at all.
Yeah, I was actually kind of taken aback by that too because I don't consider Kushiel's Dart romantasy, although there is a romantic element to it, I guess.
I actually remember that being one of the things that annoyed me, where it's like the sex scene that felt emotionally important in Kushiel's Dart being with Jocelyn. She didn't tell us anything. She skipped over it. I was like, that's the one I wanted to see. You've been building up for this for how many hundreds of thousands of words, and then you skipped it? Yeah, so on that note, I was very pleased to circle around and get back to it finally a whole last book later.
I felt like this book was much more romance than Kushiel's Dart.
Because his focus is so much on her, even when he's convinced himself that he hates her.
I will say, I wouldn't call this decadent and dark, which is one of the quotes on the back of my book.
Somebody called this dark? Okay.
Decadent and dark. And I'm like, you're talking about Kushiel's Dart, not this book. Sorry.
I'm pretty sure that someone calling this book decadent and dark is just someone who has not read anything dark ever.
I think it's a description maybe for the world as a whole.
Yeah.
And is being misapplied to this novel.
Yeah, I would believe that.
Which I think kind of pivots in the biggest question that I had for this book is like, who is this for? Because tonally it's such a huge switch from Kushiel's Dart. So, like, I don't know that it would even serve as, like, an entry point for new readers, because if somebody read this and went, I like how she focuses her storytelling, and then pivoted into Kushiel's Dart, they would be like, holy fuck, this lady's weird. You know what I mean? It would just be such a hard left turn for somebody that, like...
I don't think this is an entry. I don't think you could read this book if you haven't read Kushiel's Dart first.
Yeah, that was the other thing.
Yes, I agree. I have thoughts on that. Before we get too far into the conversation, I think we should say that we are essentially treating this as a sequel to Kushiel's Dart, which means we're not going to try to avoid spoilers for Kushiel's Dart. And that, in turn, means that we're not going to have a spoiler section for this book because Kushiel's Dart spoils this book because this book is Kushiel's Dart from another character's perspective. So if you haven't read the series and don't want spoilers, this episode is maybe not for you.
Go listen to Kushiel's Dart. That one I think we did a spoiler section on.
Yes, I think we did. But Lily, I agree. I don't think this is an entry point into the series. I think that this book is specifically for existing fans of the series. I think there's a lot of information in it that is only half explained. Information and events that's only half explained, and
it can't recap.
Yeah, it expects you to have read Kushiel's Dart, and it expects you to know Phaedra's perspective, which is much more comprehensive than Jocelyn's.
Yeah, once he meets up with her, there's a lot of scenes where, as a reader, you know important things are happening, and you just do not get to see them. But then, because you've read Kushiel's Dart, you know, oh, okay, that's where Phaedra talked to this person. And oh, okay, that's where Phaedra learned this thing. And it's like, when you point it out, it feels, pretty obvious that I don't know if you could navigate it without knowing what Phaedra's doing.
Yeah, I mean, like, the first bit of the book where Jocelyn is at his training, sure, you can read that without any other context. But once he goes to the city, if you don't know what's going on, I think you're going to be pretty lost.
It also changes the tone immensely.
Massively, yeah.
I enjoyed reading this book much more than Kushiel's Dart.
I have to say that's probably not hard.
Yeah. And, like, I'm not even a military fantasy person, but I am neutral on that in a way I am not neutral on political fantasy.
Yeah, I think any quibbles that I have with this book come down to my personal taste as a reader. So I would like to put that disclaimer on early on so I don't have to keep saying it. There are ways in which she chooses her focus that I don't care for, or rather, there are ways in which she chooses her focus that I feel like the stuff that I wanted got left behind. For example, I learned very much that as a reader, I like to see things happen and draw my own conclusions, if that makes sense. So it's like in the first section of the book when he's in his training, it's a very hands on story in that he is sitting with people, meeting them, he's being trained, he's having interactions, and we are learning his world through him. And because he's directly involved with everything that's going on, I felt like I really understood what was going on. Even when sometimes Selwyn talks about politics and he goes, but I had no idea what he was talking about. I was like, yeah, buddy, you and me both. You know what I mean? And so for that section of the book, I really loved it. And her skills as a writer are very clear all the way through. But then when it pivoted into once he met up with Phaedra, suddenly the book relied on a lot of things that he doesn't get to see. And the more of those things stacked up, the harder it was for me to be invested. And I want to be really clear that, like, I get that that's realistic for a soldier. Sometimes in these situations, people have to respond to things that they don't see. So I don't fault her for making the choice. It's just for me as a reader, every time something happened off screen, I felt a little bit less connected. And it slowly whittled away my investment in how it was going.
I think that really has to do with this not being for people who aren't fans of the first book. And, like, for myself, I love the original trilogy. I love the sequel trilogies. I really enjoyed this book. I wouldn't say it's my favorite, partly because it's not as politically focused, and I just really enjoy that more. But it was fascinating for me to read a book from the perspective of someone who reacts to things without actually knowing what's going on. Like, it was a really interesting choice.
That part of it was well done. Yeah.
I loved that all the politics were off screen because I could not care less. And it was interesting to me that you said the book is relying on things happening off screen, because I would actually argue that this book is focused so much on Jocelyn as a character. So, yes, while there are world events going on that he is involved with sort of tangentially, what we really care about is him growing as a person over time because of various situations he's been put into.
Struggling to grow.
Struggling so hard.
He's so useless. I had to keep reminding myself how young he is, and it actually makes sense that he's that useless, because sometimes stuff would come up and he would do the stupidest thing possible and be like, man, aren't you elite? Like, get your shit together.
He is such a dum-dum.
But it tracks for how young he is. I had to check myself and, like, tell myself to stop being so bitchy about it.
He's what, 20 in this book?
Is he even that old?
Well, he has his gap year.
He has his gap year.
After he graduates from Cassiel school.
Yeah, so Cassiel school is what, 7 years? Which would mean he's 17 at the end of that. So then he's 18 after his gap year. So 19 when he goes off to guard Phaedra.
Oh, so he was training other students for fully a year?
At least a full year. It might have been longer than that.
I thought it was a year, yeah.
Okay.
Or about a year. But either way, I mean, 19, 18, 19, 20, that's
stupid.
Still baby.
Yeah.
Yeah, and the fact that he spent the time training rather than experiencing real world stuff does lend credence to this fact that he's totally incapable of handling any problems.
Yeah, like, his order is so isolated, both in terms, I think just geographically, like, it sounds like they're kind of middle of nowhere, but also emotionally disconnected from the rest of the world.
Yeah, they don't let the students what's the word? Fraternize with the locals too much.
Yeah.
So it tracks. But then it also comes up with like a logic issue to me where it's like, if he's this useless on his first posting, why aren't they training these kids better if they expect him to be elite? You know what I mean? Like,
Well, I wonder if that's because of the nature of the post itself. I mean, if his job was just guard the king, there's not a lot of decision making there, right?
oh, I guess so. That does make sense. You're not meant to navigate politics.
Yeah, I think he just gets really unlucky with his, or lucky, depending on how you look at it, with his posting, in that it demands from him a whole set of skills that he's not had the opportunity to learn.
He did not have, yeah. This poor kid. And so as a character, I did really like him, except I did find the weird, insistent sex shaming to be tiresome. And so that was another part of why I wondered who it was for, because it's like one side of the coin is that it's clearly not for newcomers, but the other side of the coin is that people who liked Kushiel's Dart probably did enjoy that it was quite sex positive. And so to flip and read this, like, not only is it sex shaming, but the book constantly diminishes their expectations of women in general. And it was just like, man, I could have read like 100 other books that had this tone. Why am I here?
Well, I do need to quibble that it is very clearly Jocelyn who has those opinions.
Yes, Jocelyn and
His whole order sucks.
yeah.
We can get behind that.
Yeah.
But like so much of the book is about him realizing that that's stupid and bad. And so yes, we do have to set up the foundation, and that took a very long time. But his growth wasn't very enjoyable for me.
He does grow, and he does come to appreciate it, or he does come to
break his vows.
Yeah.
I was gonna say that sex is not inherently a bad thing.
Well, he just comes out and says it. Hold on. You keep going, I'll find the page.
Even when he is more sex positive at the end of the book, he still kind of is kink shaming Phaedra for her BDSM tendencies.
Yeah, and I guess that part made me wonder, like, I don't necessarily have issue with the concept of it as a starting point in the character growth. It's more, for somebody who enjoyed Kushiel's Dart, I had wondered if that would be tiresome. So for you who enjoyed Kushiel's Dart, the tone switch of it being a shameful thing, did you find it tiresome too, or is that just something that you're used to as a reader? Or
I don't know if I would say that I found it tiresome, per se. I definitely found it odd. Like, I was expecting it, because obviously this is from Jocelyn's perspective, and we know from Kushiel's Dart what he is like about sex and where he comes from, so it wasn't a surprise. And it was very, very clearly his perspective, not the world around him.
oh, yeah, for sure.
And I think Carey does a great job at making that clear. But there was a little bit of a disconnect between what I knew of the world and what I was seeing from his perspective. And so that was a little odd.
See, I think that's part of why you can't read this book without having read Kushiel's Dart. Because if you just jumped into this book without any context, you might think that the book was saying, yeah, people who have sex are bad people and stupid and dumb and make bad decisions. But because you've read an entire novel or 9 books
Yeah.
setting up the fact that that is not the case.
And Jocelyn's order is just like excessive, over the top with this shit. Yeah, that makes sense. I guess when you have a big enough platform, you absolutely can write specifically to your platform. And maybe in a way, like my own writer brain of how do you market something like this was getting in my way.
I pulled out a quote on page 176, which, to be fair, could be a whole ass book. But in this case, it's page 176 out of 500. So we're not even halfway through. And this book just comes out and says it on the page. There are disadvantages to being raised among boys and men whose worth is measured by their fighting skills. We're not taught to recognize different kinds of strength, nor that the deadliest weapons are not necessarily made of steel. So
What was the? Do you remember what the context for that was? Like where? Because I feel like I remember that, but then also.
So this is after Delany Delaney has died, and he has realized how in the shit Phaedra has been.
And he missed, Jocelyn specifically missed so much of it.
Yeah. But Phaedra knew what was going on, and he's like, oh shit, she's competent, I have fucked up. And then he's also echoes his buddy Selwyn earlier on is talking about politics and talking about Melisande, and is like,
she's just a woman. Yeah.
Yeah.
That came up a couple times.
I doubt she's a serious player in the game. After all, she's just a woman.
Yeah.
Jocelyn meditates on that quite a bit.
Learns pretty quickly that actually that was a stupid thing to say.
Again, it's wild for people who have read Kushiel's Dart. And the other thing, I think this is basically just going to be a long podcast essay on why this is not an introductory book to the world.
Yeah.
You can only go that far if you have such an established world to play with.
Yeah. But I was going to say the interesting thing to me is how kind of comparatively minor Melisande is in this book. Like, we meet her, I think, twice. She's mentioned briefly a couple of times, a handful of times, but she doesn't actually have a huge presence on page.
No, not at all.
And then you compare that to Kushiel's Dart, and just the
she very much drives that book. Yeah.
Yeah. The different character focuses and who gets the page time, it makes very much sense for the two characters of Phaedra and Jocelyn, but it's very different.
Which, I mean, to her credit, is a skill. The skill of knowing that she can't just tell the audience what she wants them to know, because Jocelyn wouldn't know that. I have to applaud how consistent she is with her own character building. Because you're right. And actually, I don't think I even noticed what you just pointed out, because I remember Melisandre so clearly from Kushiel's Dart. Even, I think it was 3 years ago, guys. Like,
everything is 1 or more years, and I just never specify.
I will look it up on our calendar.
It's been a while, yeah.
Yeah, and so, even I remember specifically, where I was in time and space the first time this book mentions Melisandre, and Selwyn saying her name and, dismissing her, and I was like, little does he know this whole story. And I don't think I even realized that I was doing that, how much I was filling in those gaps as somebody who's read Kushiel's Dart. So kudos to you for noticing, but also, yeah, you're right. If somebody didn't know that name, I don't know if the book would even work for them as a cohesive story.
So we recorded our Kushiel's Dart episode March 12th, 2022.
Okay, so 2 years ago.
2-ish, yeah.
2 and change.
2 1/4.
I'm surprised I remember it as clearly, which, I mean, circles back to an author thing where people don't have to love your book, but if you live in their head rent-free, you've done something right.
Yeah. Absolutely.
I don't remember what else I read 2-ish years ago, to tell you the truth.
Well, I think what we're circling around is that this book just simply isn't a standalone.
Yeah.
It's not. If you have 9 novels, or even just one, ahead of time establishing this very sex-positive society, you can take the risk of going, really far in the other direction for 200 pages, because you've built up that trust with your reader by then.
And I think to your point, Krystle, about how does one market this, I think one markets this by knowing that you have a huge fan base for the original trilogy, which Jacqueline Carey does. And so I feel like this is a passion project that she was able to do because she is this big name author. And so she doesn't necessarily need to market it to new people.
I mean, that's the same thing with any sequel, right? You don't expect someone to read a sequel who hasn't read the first book.
Yes, I guess to me, what tripped me up is not thinking of it as a series continuity.
Well, because it's not continuity in time, right? It goes back in time, which feels like it should be, okay, then this is also a beginning.
Yeah, but it's not. I think you're right in that case where you wouldn't expect somebody to pick up a book 2 without marketing book 1 at them. And I think this book kind of falls into that same zone of it serves as new content for people who did love the first trilogy at least.
And I think, like, you can look at fan fiction, right? And there's plenty of fan fiction that's the original work just regurgitated from someone else's perspective or from a different character's perspective. And there's a big readership for that, an appeal for that. And I think that that's what this is. It's just done by the author. It's not fan fiction.
Yeah, but it's just like a chance to go back to the world that you loved so much and experience something new.
And, okay, not devil's advocate exactly, but from my perspective, someone who did read Kushiel's Dart, because it's a big name fantasy book, and it's worth to take a risk on those, even if you don't think it's necessarily for you, because the tone and genre of this was so different, I ended up liking it quite a bit more. I don't think I would read Kushiel's Dart just to read this book, but I did read Kushiel's Dart. I didn't love it, but this book is different enough that it was worth a second try, in the way that the second book in the Kushiel's Dart series is not.
For you.
For me.
Yeah, and certainly any of the problems that I have and that I'll gripe about is simply taste rather than skill. Because definitely she is a very good writer. Like, her world building is incredible.
And I loved that we focused on one character in this. Like, this was so much more of a personal story than Kushiel's Dart was, which is absolutely my jam. There's the, like, pining. There's angst and pining in this book that we do not get in Kushiel's Dart.
Yeah, I really like Jocelyn. And I remember, I seem to remember I really liked him having read Kushiel's Dart as well. Because that's why I agreed to this, I think.
It wasn't because you both love me very much.
That 90% that.
I wouldn't have done it if it weren't for an opportunity to come talk to you. But I think because I liked Jocelyn in the first one, I did really enjoy it. I could have done an entire book about his training and been perfectly happy. And then he goes off to meet Phaedra and the book ends and then you have to read Crucial Start. You know what I mean? Like, I would have taken this as a full prequel and been very happy. I thought the way that his training did the heavy lifting of his world building was really well done. And I feel like mentally I was taking some notes. And coming back to it after reading kind of adjacent to the genre for a long time, coming back to it and reading that first section, I was like, oh man, I miss this genre. I'm really digging this. I'm gonna have to read some more stuff like this.
His training montage, if you can call it a training montage, the, first 170 pages, really reminded me of the very first half of Inda by Sherwood Smith.
I said the same thing. Well, that and Master in Command.
I have not read Master in Command.
Sorry. Stranger to Command.
Stranger to Command, yes. Yes.
Completely different book.
Very different books. Stranger to Command, also by Sherwood Smith.
He even does the
war games.
The war games. Yeah, I was like, this is just Inda in a different world. Not just. I enjoyed it. I think because I liked Inda, I got some weird backlash nostalgia for it.
Residual good feelings.
Yeah.
I'm trying to think if it made me think of anything. I didn't think of anything specific, but tonally and the focus of it and his training and his growing up, it did have a very nostalgic, this is why I really love this genre vibe to it that I sunk into it really fast. And people were so surprised that I was enjoying it, right? Because it's like, oh, this is the plot twist, I did that. I did not expect. But even, whatever I didn't like about Kushiel's Dart, that was not a skill issue on her part. It was a me problem. It's not you, it's me.
Well, I mean, there can be really good books that you just don't vibe with.
Yeah.
And there's no shame in that. That's just what being a reader and being an individual is all about. We all have different tastes.
Okay. I've spent several minutes now justifying why it's chill that Jocelyn and the Casselines are so repressed and big ol' prudes.
Oh, I did get tired of hearing about it though.
But now let's complain about it. The book flips it. It has to spend that much time creating his belief so that when it breaks, it's more meaningful.
I agree, but also that issue was actually what made it the hardest for me to figure out who it was for, because the other book is such the opposite that I found it jarring to have to listen to it over and over and over again, to an extent that it was starting to make me uncomfortable. It was just like, okay, I get it. Like, I do get it. You don't actually have to repeat this. I got it. I'm okay. I'm doing good. And I don't know, again, this is a readership thing. Like, I think it could just be me where I'm just past and through the stage in my life where I need books to tell me that this is how some people think and it's a character thing. You know what I mean? But it's not even an unusual thing to think about people, so it doesn't even feel risky. It's just like, if I wanted to hear this about me, I could have, turned the news on. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So that part of it was the biggest impediment to me really enjoying it once he pivoted into knowing Phaedra, because it wasn't as strong when he was alone at the training.
Well, that would have been weird if he just sat there in a training full of other men going, women suck, huh?
How dare they be sexy all the time?
I really enjoyed, actually, and I don't think this is something that we get in the original books. Although, I should clarify that, yes, we read Kushiel's Dart in 2022, but I haven't read any of the others for a very long time.
And you've read a lot of books since then.
And I've read a lot of books since then. But so I don't think that we get in the series, as has been written previously, Jocelyn's realization, or, and maybe not realization is, maybe that's the wrong word, but his questioning whether Cassiel and Eloa were just roommates. They were just roommates.
Friends. They were just really good buds.
Yeah. And so, I really liked that, and the comparison with how he starts out, where he's like, yeah, they're just buds.
Well, he doesn't quite get there in this book, or maybe he does. I didn't read the last 50 pages because I couldn't bring myself to care.
I mean, he does. For my statement, he does.
No. So that's what I'm about to say.
Okay.
Which is, he insists that no Casseline has ever broken their oath of chastity.
Yeah, right, buddy.
And I'm like, oh, sweet child. You just mean none of them have been exposed for it.
The ones that get caught get yeeted out of the program, and the rest of them go on and live their lives. Justice for Selwyn. Can we pivot into talking about how great Selwyn is?
Except for the whole women are meaningless thing.
Well, yeah, but we stand an unhinged Welsh lunatic. Now, I don't know.
I don't think he's actually Welsh because the geography doesn't match up.
The accent. Maybe this is a audiobook versus physical reader split, but the accent that the narrator gives him is so incredibly on the nose, and then the way his name is spelled.
The Dangelines are all French, though.
Yeah, so he can't be Welsh because he comes from the Camelin border, which borders Scaldi, or Scaldia, or whatever the actual country name is. And also, they can't, until the Master of the Straits, or the Black Boar rules in Alba, or whatever, they can't cross the straits. They can't go from Alba to Terdange. So he can't be Welsh. I'm sorry.
I'm so mad now. He's Welsh. God damn it. I'm so mad now. But for real, now I don't understand why they gave him a different accent. So
He could be, because there's a region in France that is Celtic. So he could be, that kind of semi-Welsh.
Oh man.
French Welsh.
I'm breaking up with this book officially over Selwyn's.
It was weird how much of this world, is a direct metaphor to Earth.
No, I'm still on Selwyn. I'm not ready to
Yeah, no, okay.
Because it was one of the things I love so much about him, because he arrives in the book with a very heavily, distinctly Welsh accent, and he's so fucking unhinged that I was like, that one's mine. I love him. I'm 100% invested in this character. And I feel like the way he was handled as a character was a really good symptom of the larger disconnect between me and the author and our interests, because I was so invested in Selwyn that I really thought he was going to be more important. And he's given such an important moment, too. And then he just dies. And that's just it. And it's like, what? And it was so jarring.
He's so important.
Yeah.
Because, like, him breaking his oath is part of, like, what Jocelyn keeps coming back to over and over again.
Repeated breaking his oath because he's a slut, and that's why I love him so much.
And so seeing someone choose to live their life that way, I think was very important for Jocelyn. He just is dead half the time.
I read this book after Krystle had started reading it. And Krystle, you'd posted comments in a Discord server that we're both in.
How much I love them.
And I'd followed along with them, but not really like read them closely because I hadn't read the book and I didn't want too many spoilers, although obviously the whole book is spoilered because I read Kushiel's Dart. And so you were such a Selwyn stan that when I got to the point where he died, I was like, what?
Yeah, me too, actually.
I thought that he was important.
Yeah, me too. See,
he is important. You plot-driven monsters. This is a character study, and he's so important.
He is important. You're right, but I thought he was going to be important in an alive way, not important in a dead way.
Well, okay, so here's my emotional journey that happened. He arrived, and I was like, yes, this bitch is mine. And then after a couple of chapters, I was like, oh, he's stupid. He's gonna get himself killed. And then he has that line. Now, we tried to find it, but we couldn't find it, so I'm now a little bit unclear on where the line happens. But there's a point, either immediately before he's found out as being a slut, or immediately after, where he and Jocelyn have a mock battle. And Jocelyn focuses on him a lot because he is the only one who's martially equivalent to him. Like, they are kind of the best of their student group, and they also form a bond. So there's just this plot beat where we know that Selwyn's important. And Selwyn has this line where he's beaten Jocelyn. Jocelyn always beats Selwyn in the official rules ring, but then Selwyn always beats Jocelyn when they're like play fighting outside. And Selwyn has this line that says, the reason I always beat you is because you're too afraid to get hurt, and I'm not, or something to that effect. And unless you're able to let go of that fear, you'll never be a good warrior in the real world. And it was such a profound moment that I was like, this little bitch is gonna get kicked out of the Cassiel Brotherhood. He's gonna go off, he's gonna make trouble in the world, and he's gonna get hooked into the big politics that are going on. And then he's gonna get circled back, and we're gonna see him again, and Jocelyn is gonna be forced to kill him because of this one line. And this is the arc of the story that I wrote in my head. And I was like, I'm gonna be so sad, I'm gonna be so mad when Selwyn dies. But that masochistic reader in me was like, yes, give me the pain. I was so ready.
I think I found the quote, by the way, and I found it by searching "fight me" and not Selwyn, which was a much better choice. So I believe, and you'll have to tell me if I'm wrong about this, but I believe what you're thinking about is, you don't fight fair, I complained once when he pulled off an unexpected counterstrike that didn't exist in the Cassiel forms. There's no such thing as fair in a real fight, he retorted. Only winning or dying. And even if we do live to have a chance to defend a ward, it's not going to be against another brother. The Brotherhood would terminate every single contract out there before they'd allow that to happen. You're never going to draw sword against another Cassiel in earnest, Jocelyn. Only an opponent with different training, unexpected moves. I'm doing you a favor.
Yeah, that was it. That was the moment where it's like, he's going to fight Selwyn, and that's going to be the big climax of the book. And so I was so invested in Selwyn. I was like, I'm so ready to hurt this bad and watch Jocelyn kill him. And then Selwyn just kind of quietly dies off scene. And that was where I was like, oh, that sucks.
It's interesting to hear you say that you thought that was going to be the big climax of the book, because
I couldn't remember. I couldn't remember what the start was.
coming from a perspective of, I always knew that it was basically a one-to-one replication of Kushiel's, or almost a one-to-one replication of Kushiel's dart, but from Jocelyn's perspective. Like, I was fairly sure that I knew which plot beats were going to be there, and indeed, I was right, because it's everything from Kushiel's dart, but in Jocelyn's perspective. So I wasn't expecting there to be something unexpected like that.
Well, I think where I fell apart was that I didn't remember Kushiel's dart beat for beat until Jocelyn meets Phaedra, and then every beat he hits, he's like, oh yes, okay, I remember this now, and then, oh yes, 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 okay, I remember that. And so I didn't know how much I remembered until I saw it. And then, so in the first bit of the book, I was trying to read context cues of like, okay, what's going to be important? How does Kushiel's dart go again? I don't remember. You know what I mean? And so I was like, I was searching really desperately for stuff. And then when Selwyn had that big important line, I was like, aha, I figured it out. I did not figure it out. And I found that to be, you know, I was really heartbroken about it, but then at the same time, I was like, oh, this is a lesson that I could learn about reader expectations. And I had to play devil's advocate with myself and acknowledge that Selwyn's death was very true to life for a soldier, in that sometimes they just find out one day that somebody they cared about had died and they didn't get to see it. But as a reader, when I'm really invested in characters, I want to see what happens to them, and it's just not a thing I can get over very easily. And I was so invested in him. And god damn it, he was Welsh in the audiobook.
He can be Welsh in the audiobooks, but he's definitely not Welsh in the actual book.
So the Casselines are like rude prudes, I would say. They're not just prudes, they're rude prudes. But the Dangeline Society is very... We've been using the word sex positive, which I think is mostly correct.
Sex accepting.
Yeah, there's this whole thing where, like, the greatest sin is to rape someone. And, like, that's the thing that they're like, absolutely not, never. And that's why the Scaldi are so bad, because they rape people. And I'm like, motherfuckers.
Was that retcon? Because I actually don't remember that being a hill that the first book died on.
It's not as much of a hill that the first book dies on, but it's definitely there. The focus on consent is definitely there.
I found that once they got in with the Scaldies, that's actually where the book lost me. Because I felt like they were drawing lines that actually don't exist in the real world. Culture bad, and our culture good. And I think you were loading up to say the same thing, Lily, where it's like, honey, no, that's not actually how the real world works.
Well, so this is a fantasy world. And I could say maybe they wanted me to suspend disbelief. And indeed, in this society, this fake society, that is how it works.
That or Jocelyn is so naive.
Yeah. But he's not the only one. We see other characters say, like, how dare you accuse me of that? That's the worst possible thing. So, like, we see that around. But it's like the only type of sexual assault that exists is violently being slung over someone's shoulder and carried away. Like, they do not address power imbalances. They do not address coercion. It, like, just doesn't exist.
Or grooming children to be prostitutes.
Yeah, that was what, like, oh my god.
I do think that is a little bit of a retcon, like, Jocelyn's attitude towards that, specifically. Because he has a couple of comments about, or the book has a couple of comments about, like, how the children of the Night Court totally get to choose, and they don't have actual sex until they're of age. And I'm like, you are walking back what you wrote in Kushiel's dart.
Yeah, she watched sex acts as an underage person in Kushiel's dart, if I remember correctly. So, like,
that is definitely trying to retcon things that can't really be retconned.
Which is kind of a bummer, because there could have been a really interesting conversation around, like, what does it mean to consent?
Yeah, I agree.
But this book is just like, nope.
But Jocelyn wouldn't have been capable of that.
Yes, that was just what I was going to say.
No. The world overall, though. This world could have explored that, but instead it's the only rape that exists is violence by strangers.
But also, because this book is such a character-driven novel, I don't think it could have done it because Jocelyn couldn't have done it.
This book couldn't have done it.
Yeah.
But this is not the first time that this problem is. Unless you're saying that, like, book 9 does explore that. I feel like it doesn't.
Genuinely, I can't make a statement either way because it's been like 15 years since I've read anything past book 1. So
that's fair. The vibe I get is more like Carey kind of wants to hand wave away that as an issue entirely.
Yeah.
Which I get, not wanting to tackle that in your fantasy book about fun sex stuff, but also, I don't know, but I don't think that was, like, really handled well.
No, I would agree. I mean, and for all that I love these books, they're not without their issues.
Yeah, I feel like you were gonna mention about how, like, very directly analogous it is to Christianity and specifically France. And I feel like in a way that root makes the tonal dissonance louder because we know, like, if we're drawing a direct analogy to our history, we know we weren't so strict about consent at that time. So if that's the only thing that changes, it actually stands out more rather than if we were off into a totally different fantasy and everything was different and that thing is also different. And so it makes it stand out more to me when other things are so clearly evocative of our world.
Yeah. It's like, what if it's the world history but sex?
Which arguably is just world history.
Well, yeah. But magic sex, how's that?
Yeah, magic sex, yeah.
Yeah.
I think I interrupted you when you were gonna spiel about how Christian the book is.
Oh, I was just gonna talk about how it's a one-to-one analogy of Earth, and including Christianity in that. I don't like it, and I can't tell if that's just me being salty about Kushiel's art, or if that's like a cool way to do fantasy. I don't know where I land on that. I didn't love it, but that might have been me.
I think it's you being salty about Kushiel's dart and you also being not a religious person whatsoever.
Well, I'm also talking about all of the one-to-one countries, though, not just Christianity. Like, it's France, and then that's, like, the Norse country.
Yeah, but I think they go hand in hand.
I think that is normal for some fantasy. Some fantasy definitely does that.
Like, I don't think it's cool or not cool. I think it just is. It's a way of doing fantasy.
Okay.
And you either like it or you don't.
And I think maybe in a different book I would like it more, but I might have just been bringing some disgruntlement to it.
I found that the direct analogies actually made the weird stuff stand out harder. Where if there had been some layers of, like, fantasy over the analogies, and, like, for example, every time they described Hyacinth as his brown skin, I was like, I got it. I did actually get that the first 7 times you mentioned it. He's Arab or Persian or something. I did get that. You don't have to keep telling me that he's brown. And so that stuff started to feel really weird. And there's a point where the people that save them when they're running from the scouts at the edge of the forest, the family, they use the word haram, which I remember I was actually, because I was listening to the audio and I was walking down the street and I heard, you know, the short string of fantasy jargon and then haram. I'm like, oh, a Muslim word. That's a choice. But then she actually seems to be pivoting them into being kind of Jewish. Like, I can't figure out what the direct analogy is.
Oh, they're travelers.
They're definitely Jewish. So the Tsingano or the Tsingani are the Romani people, basically.
Yeah. Right.
So that's what Hyacinth is.
No, it wasn't Hyacinth. It was
right. But I'm saying the family, the Yeshuites, are Jews.
Yeah. So, but she seems to have used the word haram as a way to describe Jocelyn and Phaedra being Gentiles, which is a choice that I had some feelings about, and I'm not really sure why. And I can't remember if it was in Kushiel's Dart too, because that's a very specific word to be using for actually a totally different religion and culture than the word comes from. So it was just, and the fact that the analogies had been drawn so directly made it stand out more. Like, it could have been a mistake if they weren't coded any specific way, if that makes sense. But the fact that then it didn't fit, it was like,
She didn't do her research.
Yeah, why do we go with haram? That's kind of a loaded word. Like that's a big word. Like why did we go there? So I found the direct analogy actually worked against the world building at times.
I found it distracting. Every time he rode his horse named Aristotle, I was like, really?
I genuinely don't remember his horse's name, so...
Really? Because it comes up a lot.
It did not register for me.
Oh, have you never heard of Aristotle? Oh, don't worry. We'll talk about this after the podcast.
Yeah, we can tell you all about
The horse, right? That's Jocelyn's horse.
I would like to circle around and say, like, there were some things that I did genuinely very much enjoy. And for example, one of the things that I did very much enjoy was the first section where it was at his training. But then there were also some of the beats that landed in the Phaedra story that Phaedra skips over almost entirely in Kushiel's Dart because it's just not in her character to notice these details or something. But then we get to see them again through Jocelyn's point of view, like fight scenes. Like specifically that the fight scene in the snow after they've escaped, but the first time they've been like kind of captured by their pursuers. In Kushiel's Dart, that lasted only about a page, and I was so angry.
Well, and the focus there is on her killing Harold the Beardless.
Yeah, and it made sense for her, and that's why I have to acknowledge, I have to like backtrack and take back some of the bitchy things I said about the first book, where actually the things that I didn't like were proof of her skill because it made sense for Phaedra to focus on that. So now reading this book and going through those beats with Jocelyn, who focused on the things that I wanted to see, I was like, yes! This is so good. Like her fight scenes are brilliant, and fight scenes that chaotic are really hard to pull off. So I have to acknowledge that she did some of those things really well. The fight scenes were great. And the scene with him and Phaedra, the first time that they have sex, it was like, yes, this is what I wanted to see in the other book. Instead of, I won't tell you the details. Like, bitch, I wanted those goddamn details. And so it was really cool to see those gaps filled in. And I feel like if you could have gone back in time and grafted the two books together, I would have enjoyed it more.
Would have been a monster book.
It would have been, that is true. Maybe it would have killed me and Lilly. Maybe I take that back.
It's interesting. The word romance has come up a couple of times in our conversation. And like, so first of all, I think we can all agree, capital R, romance, the genre romance, has nothing to do with either of these books.
Yes.
No. Yeah, no. There's sex in it. That's the only...
Well, I actually found this book much more romantic than Kushiel's Dart, because it's so much more intimate, and there's so much longing and pining and angst.
Yeah.
So even though there's much less sex...
And it's very much like the dissolution of Jocelyn's stance of sex bad, I hate this person. Like it was like it bordered on an enemies to lovers with how much he hates her at some points in that book, in a way that you wouldn't have gotten from Kushiel's Dart because she's kind of attracted to everybody, which is no shade, I can relate. But
I did feel like their relationship came entirely out of left field in Kushiel's Dart. I remember being like, what the fuck is this?
Yeah, it was just another... It was another of her big important relationships in her life, which tracked for her. But for him, it was the important relationship in his life.
I mean, Phaedra is definitely poly, and he's not.
Yeah. Yeah.
Which he struggles with. But like, in Kushiel's Dart, it's just like, oh wow, another person is so obsessed with her, they can't help but have sex with her, okay. Whereas in this, it is actually meaningful.
Yeah, I agree. I agree with that.
There was a question, was it before we started recording? Why are there so many chaste orders of soldiers?
Oh yeah, that was me.
And what's up with that? Yeah.
That was before we started recording.
Yeah, when they doubled down so hard on why it was so important for him to be celibate, like I found it really jarring because I can't figure out, other than because Christianity, I guess, I couldn't figure out what it added to his training.
But I think that's kind of a little bit the point. Like, he and Selwyn asked that question, and they don't actually get a good answer.
Except it's such a common trope in fantasy that I found my annoyance was less specifically with this one book and more with the trope at large. Like, why are the elite warriors always celibate? Like, that's just such a weird trope.
So I get an angle for it. I'm not arguing for it, but I think I see their logic in if someone has other priorities, they might not put their ward first. Now, that's really reductive with human relationships. So it doesn't hold water.
Well, but
I can see the dumbass going, oh, well, if he wants to have sex with someone else, then he might save their life instead.
Again, I think that's kind of... We're supposed to think, yeah, this is a stupid reason.
Maybe.
Yeah.
For the Cassiel order. Like, I think that is genuinely the point.
But there is a stupid reason instead of just no reason.
Yeah, and I can't speak to why it's a popular trope, but I do think the whole point of, or not the whole point, but one of the points that Carey is making in these books is that, yeah, it's a stupid trope.
And that makes it such a funny thing about how aggressively Christian his point of view is. Where at the one hand, like, she's very clearly familiar, but on the other hand, she's like, this is a horrible way to frame your whole life. You people need to stop it. So it's like, it's funny where it's so Christian that I could feel it, and it made me uncomfortable at points, but on the flip side of it, it's so sex-driven that it would also make hardcore Christianity uncomfortable. So that was a really interesting storytelling angle.
I had a similar experience. I forgot how Christian their religion is.
Yeah.
And I was like, okay, yes, this is Earth. Okay, got it. But then thinking of, like, how very much contemporary Christianity would not want to be associated with this.
BDSM.
Yeah, it was kind of delightful.
Yeah, it does. It definitely has that flavor of person raised Christian grapples with sexuality in a way that eventually I softened to the whole stance that the book makes. But at first it was really hard to listen to how aggressively over it he was. And it was like, yeah, I got it, buddy, I got it.
Well, and if you didn't know where this book was going, I don't think you could make it through those first 100 pages.
Yeah.
I mean, again, coming down to our argument, this book is not a standalone. It's not an introductory point to the series.
I don't think it is. Yeah, you're right. So there we go. We've solved it. It's not a standalone. Read Kushiel's Dart first. More importantly, enjoy Kushiel's Dart first, and then you can circle back and you'll also enjoy Cassiel's Servant.
Or you could hate it, and you still... I mean, both of you still kind of enjoyed this book, so...
I enjoyed this book more than Kushiel's Dart, but I couldn't have read this book without Kushiel's Dart. Did I like this book enough that it made Kushiel's Dart worth it? I don't think so.
Sara's worth it.
Sara's worth it.
Sarah is worth it.
I appreciate that. I definitely like Kushiel's Dart more, just because it focuses on things that I'm more interested in. If she came out with books 2 and 3 that follow Jocelyn's perspective from Kushiel's Dart 2 and 3, I would read those. I wouldn't make you talk about them on the podcast, so don't worry.
Ooh, what if we did, you read the Kushiel's Dart ones, and then we read the Jocelyn's version?
Oh, that would be fascinating.
And then we would come together and make one good book that we both enjoyed.
I'm actually here for that if she decides to continue on Jocelyn's perspective. I don't know if she will. She hasn't said.
I would do that. I would sign on for that.
I'm glad that you didn't hate it as much as you both hated Kushiel's Dart. I was a little concerned.
I'm really surprised that you were willing to take the chance on us for the second round of torture. But yeah, I feel like generally this stance of acknowledging what the book is doing, because I won't say that she did anything badly. She did what she wanted to do very well. It's just that me as a reader, my focus lies differently. And so it didn't... I wrote a whole ass extra book that she didn't even write. in my head of Selwyn circling back, of there being this big epic showdown. And I'm gonna go write that book now, I guess. But I think Cassiel's Servant taught me a lot about myself as a reader and what I like in books, because having so much stuff happen outside of Jocelyn's circle taught me exactly what it is I like in books that I love so much. And it also teaches, you as a reader to be able to talk about why something didn't work for you. It's not that it was a bad book, it's just that my focus is not aligned with hers.
Some of the plot holes around consent makes it bad. For Kushiel's Dart, like, not everything we complained about is a matter of taste.
I'm not going to say it makes it bad, but I will agree that there are some plot holes around consent.
It makes it uncomfortable. Yeah.
That was a genuine complaint about quality. I'm not saying it made the whole book bad. I'm saying that was not a skill thing. Oh, she did it really good. She just did something different. Like, no,
that's
that's not a
skill
choice.
thing.
I forgot about that part, but you are right about that.
And also some of the prose was meh in Kushiel's Dart. Cassiel's Servant was better.
No, I think that is a matter of taste.
Specifically, how she expresses beauty really killed me in Kushiel's Dart, where it's like she's just so beautiful and elegant and dainty for like several hundred words over and over again. That really hurt me on a reader level of like, I can't fucking do this. Like I can't hear about one more beautiful person. Can we just accept on premise that everyone is stunningly gorgeous and get on with the book?
I think that was a early 2000s just like how things happened in books.
Yeah.
But that doesn't make it good though. You're just saying it's not her fault.
Yeah, but
it can still be bad and not her fault.
If that is your complaint about the prose, I'll grant it to you, but I don't think that was your complaint about the prose.
That wasn't my complaint, no.
Yes. So, Krystle, I'm agreeing with. You are not.
Yes.
Well, Krystle, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
What have you got going on? What can listeners be excited for?
What have I got going on? Well, we're still pretty consistent over at the Dripping Bucket. Me and Fletcher interviewing poor innocent souls and making them uncomfortable for 25, give or take, minutes. And then probably by the time this episode is out, I'm headed over to Worldcon and I'll be recording some content over there with all of the people.
It's not going to be because this episode comes out next week.
Oh.
Worldcon is not quite that soon.
Okay. It's nearly soon. So by the time this episode comes out, I'll be freaking out about how much I still have to do before I go to Worldcon.
Yes.
There you go.
Yeah, so that's kind of sucking up all of my attention at the moment. And that's probably why I can't read anything.
I would believe it.
Yeah.
And if people wanted to find you on social media to hear about new episodes of The Dripping Bucket or whatever you're currently working on writing-wise...
Mostly I'm on Twitter. I've kind of abandoned most other platforms. Maybe I won't.
Please come back to Blue Sky.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Once I'm back...
I mean, we've not been much on social media lately, but please come back to Blue Sky.
Try. I promise to try. But I'm there. I have an @ there. It's just @Krystle Matar on any platform. And if my name doesn't come up, then I'm not on the platform is pretty much the end of it. And yeah, so mostly I'm just working on getting Tainted Dominion 3 out and getting ready for Glasgow.
And website, newsletter, things like that.
I have a website also under my name. I haven't updated it in several years, and I'm very sorry. It's being kicked off into shit I'm going to deal with in September. September's going to be hell for me trying to update all of my stuff. I'm working on possibly doing a Patreon for like cutscenes, especially smutty cutscenes, because y'all, I wrote so much smut trying to fix my second book, and I cut nearly all of it out of my second book to a point where readers have thus commented that they were surprised how little smut there is in that second book. So I'm gonna pivot and try to monetize some of that blood, sweat, and tears and post that on Patreon. So eventually, if I do that, that'll be on my Twitter.
Well, thank you so much for joining us. You make reading these books a delight.
It was worth it. It was worth it to come.
Only Krystle, though, not me.
Knowing I had an ally in the conversation ahead.
Sorry.
I mean, that's fair. That's fair. Yeah, as always, Krystle, it's a delight to have you on, even when we don't have the same book opinions.
Yeah. Yeah. I felt really bad about the first one, so I tried to be nicer, but I don't think I succeeded.
No, this was much less painful for me, personally. Thank you so much for listening to this episode of Fiction Fans.
Come disagree with us. We're on Twitter, Blue Sky, Instagram, and TikTok at FictionFansPod. You can also email us at fictionfanspod@gmail.com.
If you enjoyed this episode, please rate and review on Spotify and Apple Podcasts, and follow us wherever your podcasts live.
We also have a Patreon, where you can support us and find exclusive episodes and a lot of other nonsense.
Thanks again for listening, and may your villains always be defeated.
Bye!